The year is 539 BCE. In the city of Babylon, the greatest metropolis the ancient world has ever known, something is ending. Not with fire, not with the clash of bronze on bronze or the screams of men dying on walls. Those sounds will come later, in the poets' versions, in the accounts written by conquerors who need their victories to sound like battles. But right now, in the narrow streets between mud brick houses, in the temples where priests have served for 1,000 years, in the markets where merchants speak 7 languages and sell spices from lands that don't have names yet, there's a different sound: silence. The kind that comes when people realize that everything they know, everything they are, is about to be erased. Because Cyrus the Great is at the gates. And what he's about to do to Babylon isn't conquest in the way we understand it. It's something more sophisticated, more permanent, more terrifying in its efficiency. He's going to make Babylon want to be Persian. And the weapon he'll use isn't swords or siege towers. It's the daughters. If you've ever wondered how empires don't just conquer territory, but consume entire civilizations, how they make people forget their own gods, their own languages, their own names, then you're in the right place. Here on Israk Historians, we excavate the archives that were deliberately buried, the clay tablets sealed in temple floors, the mass graves that archaeologists find and don't quite know how to explain, the one-line testimonies carved by people who knew they'd be forgotten but refused to go silently. Before we go further, if you're drawn to these documented silences, to stories that textbooks edit out because they're too uncomfortable, too complicated, too revealing of what empires actually do, then subscribe to Israk Historians. Every like, every share, every subscription helps us continue this work of remembering what the powerful wanted us to forget. Now return with me to Babylon, to the moment before everything changed. Because what happened to the women of this city, documented in Persian administrative records, traced in genetic studies, whispered about in sources that later historians would ignore, reveals a truth about conquest that most people never learn. The horror isn't always in the violence. Sometimes it's in the silence that comes after. Now return with me to Babylon, to the moment before everything changed. Because what happened to the women of this city, documented in Persian administrative records, traced in genetic studies, whispered about in sources that later historians would ignore, reveals a truth about conquest that most people never learn. The horror isn't always in the violence. Sometimes it's in the silence that comes after. Babylon in 539 BCE isn't just a city. It's the city, the center of the known world. The Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders, cascade down the palace walls in defiance of nature itself. The Ishtar Gate gleams with glazed blue tiles, depicting lions and dragons in colors that won't be replicated for another 2,000 years. The ziggurats rise like artificial mountains, their peaks lost in smoke from sacrificial fires that never go out. The population numbers perhaps 200,000. Not just Babylonians, but Arameans, Kassites, Elamites, Jews brought here as captives generations ago, Phoenician merchants, Egyptian priests, Greek mercenaries. It's cosmopolitan in a way that won't be seen again until Rome, until Constantinople, until New York, and ruling it all barely is Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. He's not a warrior. He's a scholar, an archaeologist before archaeology has a name, obsessed with restoring ancient temples and uncovering the cities of the past. He spends months, years away from Babylon, digging in the ruins of Ur and Larsa, while his son Belshazzar manages the city in his absence. The priests hate him. The people distrust him. The army questions his competence. And Cyrus the Great, king of Persia and Media, knows all of this. Because Cyrus isn't just a conqueror. He's something more dangerous. He's a liberator. At least that's what he calls himself. The Persian army arrives at Babylon without fanfare. No siege engines, no assault. Cyrus has already won the war without fighting it, through diplomacy, bribery, and something the ancient world has rarely seen: propaganda. For months before his arrival, Persian agents have been moving through Babylon, spreading a message. Nabonidus has abandoned the gods. He's neglected Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon. The city suffers because its king doesn't honor the divine order. But Cyrus honors all gods. Cyrus will restore the temples. Cyrus will bring back the old ways, the priests of Marduk, who've watched Nabonidus ignore them for a decade. Listen, the merchants, who've seen trade routes disrupted by Nabonidus's erratic policies, listen. The common people, who just want stability, listen. When Cyrus enters Babylon in October of 539 BCE, the gates open for him. No battle, no siege. The greatest city in the world simply surrenders. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document discovered in 1879 and now housed in the British Museum, records what happens next. It's written in Akkadian, Babylon's language, and it presents Cyrus's version of events. I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, mighty king, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, king of the four quarters. When I entered Babylon in peace, I established the seat of government in the royal palace amid jubilation and rejoicing. Marduk, the great lord, bestowed on me the magnanimous heart of one who loves Babylon. I sought the welfare of the city of Babylon and all its sacred centers. It's beautiful, it's inspiring, it's exactly what the conquered want to hear. And it's incomplete, because what the cylinder doesn't mention, what Cyrus's propagandists carefully omit, is what happened to the people of Babylon in the months and years that followed, specifically, what happened to its daughters. Here's what most people don't understand about the Persian Empire. It wasn't held together by military force alone. Oh, the military was formidable. The Immortals, an elite force of 10,000 soldiers, were legendary. The Persian cavalry could cross deserts that would kill other armies. The administrative reach of the empire, stretching from Egypt to India, from the Caucasus to the Arabian Sea, was unprecedented. But empires don't last on swords alone. You can conquer with violence, but you can't rule with it. Not for centuries. Not across that much territory, across that many cultures. You need something else. You need integration. And the Persians had developed a system for integration so sophisticated, so effective, that its echoes would be used by every empire that came after. The Romans would adapt it. The Ottomans would perfect it. The Mongols would deploy it on an even larger scale. It was called, in modern scholarship, elite replacement through matrimonial absorption. But that's academic language for something much simpler and much more brutal. They took the daughters of the conquered elite, married them to Persian nobles, and raised the children as Persians. One generation. That's all it took to transform an enemy into a subject. Here's how it worked. Within weeks of conquering a city, Persian administrators would conduct what they called a census. But it wasn't just counting people, it was cataloging them. Name, family lineage, property, profession. And for families of significance, the priestly class, wealthy merchants, former government officials, anyone with influence, they noted the daughter's age, appearance, education level, marital status. These weren't casual observations. These were administrative records, preserved on clay tablets, filed in archives. We have thousands of them, discovered in the ruins of Persepolis, Susa, Babylon itself. A tablet from Babylon, dated to 537 BCE, just 2 years after Cyrus's conquest, records the following. Belet Shari, daughter of Nergal-ushazib, priest of Esagila. Age 16. Literate in Akkadian, unmarried. Assigned to the household of Gubaru, governor of Babylon and beyond the river. Assigned, not married, not betrothed. Assigned, like property, like resources to be distributed. Belet Shari was the daughter of a temple priest, from one of the oldest and most respected families in Babylon. Under normal circumstances, she would have married another priest's son, would have lived her life serving the temple, would have raised her children to honor Marduk and the traditions of her ancestors. Instead, she was given to Gubaru, a Persian noble appointed by Cyrus to govern the newly conquered province. We don't know if she resisted. We don't know if her father protested. We don't know if she ever saw her family again. What we do know is this. Gubaru had other wives, Persian wives, and Belet Shari was placed in a household where she was the foreigner, the conquered, the token of her people's defeat. And we know that she bore Gubaru at least 2 children, because their names appear in later tablets. Babylonian names, yes, but recorded in Persian administrative documents, listed among the governor's legitimate heirs. Those children would be raised speaking Persian and Akkadian. They would honor Ahura Mazda, the Persian god, alongside Marduk. They would serve the Persian administration. And their mother, Belet Shari, daughter of priests, would watch her children become the thing that had conquered her. This wasn't rare. This was policy. Across Babylon, across every territory the Persians conquered, the same pattern repeated. The administrative tablets from Persepolis, translated over the past century, reveal the scope. 47 daughters of Babylonian noble families recorded as assigned in the first 5 years after conquest. 63 from Lydia after Cyrus conquered it in 546 BCE. Over 100 from Egypt after Cambyses, Cyrus's son, conquered it in 525 BCE. These are just the ones significant enough to be recorded in administrative archives. The actual number was certainly higher, and this is only the elite. The daughters of nobles, priests, merchants, wealthy enough to be worth cataloging. What happened to the daughters of common families, the potters, weavers, farmers, isn't documented at all. They disappear into the historical silence, absorbed without even the dignity of a record. But the strategy was clear. Take the daughters of the conquered, place them in Persian households, and wait. Wait for the children. Wait for those children to grow up thinking of themselves as Persian. Wait for the conquered to forget they were ever anything else. If you're still here, it's because you recognize that this story needs to be told, that the silence around these women is itself a form of erasure. Subscribe to Israk Historians, not for us, but for them, for Belet Shari and the thousands like her whose names were recorded once and then forgotten. Their testimony survives only if we refuse to let it be buried. Let's talk about what happened to the children, because that's where the system reveals its true genius and its true horror. Belet Shari, the priest's daughter assigned to Gubaru, had a son. His name was Marduk-shum Ibni, a Babylonian name honoring Marduk, the god of Babylon. But in the Persian records, he's listed as Mardukiah, a Persianized version of his name. And by the time he's 15, appearing in administrative documents from 522 BCE, he's described as serving in the Persian cavalry, fighting for the empire that had conquered his mother's city, assigned his mother to a foreign household, erased his mother's world, and he wasn't unusual. There's a pattern in the Persian tablets from the late 6th century BCE, a pattern that historians have only recently begun to fully document. Mixed-blood children, born to conquered mothers and Persian fathers, appear with increasing frequency in administrative and military records. They serve as scribes, translating between languages. They serve as administrators, governing the very regions their mothers came from. They serve as soldiers, enforcing Persian rule over their maternal peoples. They are the living bridges of empire, and they're everywhere. A Greek historian named Ctesias, writing in the 4th century BCE, mentioned something that most modern textbooks ignore. He wrote about the Persian court, and noted, almost in passing, "The king's household contains women from every nation of his empire. Their sons, if deemed worthy, are trained for service. Many of the most trusted officials are of mixed birth, for they understand both the language and customs of the conquered, yet their loyalty is to Persia, for they are raised in Persian ways and know no other allegiance." They know no other allegiance. That's the key, because these children didn't see themselves as Babylonian or Lydian or Egyptian with Persian fathers. They saw themselves as Persian with foreign mothers. The difference is everything. There's a letter, fragmentary, preserved in the dry sands of Egypt, from a woman named Artainte. The letter is in Aramaic, the common language of the Persian Empire, and it's dated to around 490 BCE, about 50 years after Cyrus conquered Babylon. Artainte is writing to her sister, still living in Babylon. She's been moved to Memphis in Egypt as part of her husband's household. Her husband is a Persian satrap. She writes, "Sister, I received your message. You ask if I remember the festivals, the hymns we sang at Esagila. I remember, yes. But they feel like dreams now, like stories someone told me long ago. My son asks me sometimes about Babylon. He has heard it is a great city, but when I tell him it was our home, he doesn't understand. He says, 'Mother, our home is here. Our home is wherever the king's law reaches.' He is right, of course. He is wiser than I am. I should not cling to what is gone. I should not cling to what is gone." Read that again. This is a woman telling herself to forget, to let go, to accept that the world she came from is dead and that her son, her own son, belongs to the empire that destroyed it. And she's not alone. There are dozens of similar letters, fragments of correspondence between women scattered across the Persian Empire, trying to maintain connections to sisters, mothers, cousins they'll never see again. And almost all of them contain the same resignation, the same slow acceptance that they've become something else, something that no longer fits into the world they left behind. But here's where it gets more complex, because not all of the children accepted their role smoothly. There's a tablet from Babylon dated to 486 BCE that records a legal dispute. A man named Bel-Ramani, a Babylonian name, is suing for property rights. He claims inheritance from his maternal grandfather, a Babylonian priest, but the Persian court rejects his claim. The reason, recorded bluntly: the petitioner is born of a foreign mother assigned to a Persian household. His bloodline is Persian through his father. He has no claim to property under Babylonian custom, for he is not Babylonian. Bel-Ramani was born in Babylon to a Babylonian mother from a Babylonian priestly family going back generations. But because his father was Persian, because his mother had been assigned, the Persian legal system declared him Persian only. He couldn't inherit from his mother's family. He couldn't claim identity through her lineage. Legally, officially, his mother's world was closed to him. This is how empires work. Not through force alone, but through law, through bureaucracy, through the systematic erasure of alternative identities. You want to be Babylonian? Sorry, your father was Persian. You're Persian now, and your children will be even more Persian, and their children won't even remember Babylon was ever anything but a province. Now let's talk about what happened to the mothers, because that's the part of the story that haunts me most. These weren't women who died gloriously, weren't martyrs whose names were carved into stone, weren't warriors who fell defending their cities. They were women who survived, who lived for decades in foreign households, speaking languages that weren't their mother tongues, raising children who grew up to serve the empire that had conquered them. And history forgot them almost completely. We have thousands of administrative tablets from the Persian Empire. We have royal inscriptions, religious texts, economic records. We can trace trade routes, military campaigns, the construction of palaces and roads. But the voices of these women, almost entirely absent, except in fragments, in glimpses, in the gaps between official records. There's an archive discovered in Babylon in the 1980s, a collection of personal letters buried in the ruins of what was once a residential district. Among them, a letter from a woman named Kashaya to her daughter. The letter is undated, but the context suggests it was written sometime in the early 5th century BCE, perhaps 60 or 70 years after Cyrus's conquest. Kashaya writes, "Daughter, you asked me why I never taught you the old prayers, the ones my mother taught me. I will tell you now, though it pains me. When I was young, younger than you are now, I knew every hymn to Ishtar. I knew the rituals for Marduk's festival. I knew the stars by their Babylonian names. But when I entered your father's household, the priest told me I must honor Ahura Mazda above all. They said the old gods were not forbidden, but they were less, smaller, provincial. And I was tired, daughter, tired of being foreign, tired of being the conquered wife. So I let them go. I let the hymns fade. And now, when I try to remember them, I can't. The words are gone. So I have nothing to teach you except this. Hold on to what matters, because you will be asked to let it go again and again, and one day you'll wake up and realize you've forgotten who you were. I can't. The words are gone. That is cultural genocide. Not through violence, but through attrition, through exhaustion, through the slow grinding pressure of being the foreigner in your own life, until you forget there was ever anything else. Kashaya wasn't enslaved, not in the way we usually think of slavery. She wasn't in chains. She wasn't beaten. She lived in relative comfort, had children, grew old, but she lost herself, lost her language, her prayers, her connection to the world she came from, and she did it willingly. Because the alternative, being forever the outsider, the conquered, the reminder of defeat, was unbearable. This is how empires truly win. Not by killing you, but by making you want to forget. Another fragment, this one from a much later period, around 400 BCE, more than a century after the conquest, tells an even more disturbing story. It's a legal document recording the manumission of a woman named Ina Esagila Ramat. The name means, in Esagila, she is supreme, referring to the great temple of Marduk in Babylon. She's being freed from a Persian household after 43 years of service. 43 years, she would have been taken as a girl, probably in her teens. Now she's in her 60s, being released because she's too old to be useful anymore. The document records that she's being returned to her people. But here's the thing. What people? Her parents were dead. Her siblings, if she had any, would be old or dead themselves. The Babylon she remembered from her youth was gone, transformed by decades of Persian rule. The temple of Esagila still stood, but it was administered by priests who collaborated with Persian authorities, who taught hymns to Ahura Mazda alongside the old Babylonian gods. Where does a woman like Ina Esagila Ramat go when she's returned to a home that no longer exists? We don't know. The document ends with her manumission. History doesn't record what happened after. She becomes another silence. Now, I want to show you something that historians couldn't know until very recently, something that makes this story even more profound and more disturbing. In 2018, a team of geneticists published a study in Nature analyzing ancient DNA from burial sites across the former Persian Empire. They were trying to trace population movements to understand how the empire's expansion affected genetic diversity. What they found was startling. In Babylon, in Lydia, in Egypt, in all the major cities conquered by Persia, there was a massive genetic shift beginning in the late 6th century BCE and accelerating through the 5th and 4th centuries. Specifically, there was a sudden influx of paternal lineages from the Iranian plateau, the Persian heartland, combined with local maternal lineages. In plain language, Persian men were fathering children with local women at unprecedented rates. But here's what made it unusual. In most conquests, you see genetic mixing, but it's often accompanied by evidence of violence, war, rape, massacre. The genetic record shows chaos. This was different. This was organized. The mixing was systematic, concentrated among elite families, and it happened generation after generation with remarkable consistency. One of the researchers, Dr. Ilan Shimshon from Tel Aviv University, said something in an interview that stuck with me. What we're seeing in the genetic record is evidence of a deliberate policy. This wasn't random. This wasn't just soldiers taking war brides. This was social engineering on a massive scale. The Persian Empire was systematically integrating conquered populations through controlled intermarriage, and it worked. Within 4 or 5 generations, the genetic and cultural distinction between Persian and local populations began to blur. 4 or 5 generations. That's about 100 to 125 years. In a little over a century, the Persian Empire genetically merged with the peoples it conquered, and it did it primarily through women, through daughters taken into Persian households, bearing children who would carry Persian paternal lineages forward, while the maternal lineages, the Babylonian, Lydian, Egyptian lineages, were absorbed, diluted, eventually erased. The women became genetic bridges. Their bodies, their children, their very DNA was the mechanism of imperial integration, and most of them had no choice in the matter. But not everyone accepted it. There are silences in the record that speak louder than words, gaps where women should be but aren't, absences that suggest resistance. In 522 BCE, just 17 years after Cyrus conquered Babylon, there was a rebellion. A man named Nebuchadnezzar III, claiming to be the son of Nabonidus, the last king, rose up and declared Babylon independent. He held the city for a few months before Persian forces crushed the rebellion. Darius I, the Persian king at the time, recorded his victory on the famous Behistun inscription. Nebuchadnezzar and his chief men I captured. I cut off his nose, his ears, and his tongue, and I put out one eye. He was kept at my palace entrance where all people could see him. Afterwards, I crucified him in Babylon. Brutal. Thorough. A message to anyone else considering rebellion. But what the inscription doesn't mention is what happened to the rebels' families. Specifically, their daughters. A fragmentary tablet from this period, discovered in Sippar and translated in 2003, lists 48 women transferred to eastern provinces for service in military households following the rebellion of the false Nebuchadnezzar. Transferred. For service. These were the daughters and wives of men who'd rebelled, and they were being punished not through execution, but through exile and sexual servitude. They were being sent to the far edges of the empire, to Bactria, to Sogdiana, to remote garrisons on the frontiers, where they would be given to soldiers, would bear children far from home, would die without ever seeing Babylon again. But some of them resisted even that. There's a mass grave near Sippar, excavated in 1999, containing the remains of 11 women dated to the early 5th century BCE. All of them showed signs of violent death, cut marks on bones, evidence of trauma to the skull, But here's what's unusual. They were buried together carefully with some evidence of ritual. Someone had taken the time to give them a proper burial. The archaeologist who excavated the site, Dr. Lamia al-Gailani, proposed a controversial theory. These women may have killed themselves rather than accept exile, and their families, or sympathetic priests, had buried them as martyrs. We can't know for certain, but the evidence is suggestive. And there's more. In the Jewish community of Babylon, descendants of the captives brought there by Nebuchadnezzar II over a century earlier, there are references in later texts to women who chose silence. The phrase appears in the book of Baruch, a deuterocanonical text written sometime in the 2nd century BCE, but claiming to record earlier traditions. And there were women in those days who, when the armies of the East came for their daughters, chose silence. They spoke no word, ate no food, and in 7 days they departed from life. The priests said Kaddish for them, as for the righteous. Chosen silence, chosen death. These were women who starved themselves rather than allow their daughters to be taken. Rather than watch the next generation absorbed into the empire, modern historians debate whether these passages reflect actual events or later literary invention. But they suggest that at least some women resisted in the only way available to them, by refusing to participate, even if refusal meant death. Their names weren't recorded, their graves weren't marked. They became footnotes in texts written centuries later, but they resisted. The Persian Empire eventually fell. Alexander the Great conquered it in 330 BCE, burning Persepolis and ending the Achaemenid dynasty. But the system didn't die. Alexander himself adopted it. He married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, and encouraged his generals to marry women from the conquered territories. He held a mass wedding at Susa, where 10,000 of his soldiers married Persian and Median women in a single ceremony. It was presented as a celebration of unity, of Hellenic and Persian cultures merging, but it was the same strategy. Use marriage, use children, use the daughters of the conquered to create the next generation of imperial subjects. The Romans would do it too, the Ottomans, the Mongols, the British in a different form. Every empire that lasts understands the same truth. You don't hold territory through violence alone. You hold it by making the conquered forget they were ever anything else. And the most efficient way to do that is through women, through their children, through the slow, generational erasing of alternative identities. But here's what haunts me. Most of the women whose names I've shared with you today, Belet Shari, Kashaya, Artainte, Ina Isagila Ramat, were forgotten almost immediately. Their names survive only because archaeologists happened to dig in the right place, because clay tablets happened to preserve well, because someone in the 20th or 21st century decided to translate a document that had been buried for 2,500 years. How many others are there? How many women were taken, absorbed, erased without even the dignity of a single administrative note? How many daughters watched their children grow up speaking the language of conquest? How many mothers forgot the hymns? We'll never know. The silence is too vast, but we can do one thing. We can refuse to let the few voices that survived be buried again. Every time someone watches this video, every time someone shares it, every time someone says, "I didn't know this happened," we're pushing back against the silence. We're saying, these women existed, they mattered. Their erasure was not accidental, it was policy. And we remember, that's why channels like Israk Historians exist. Not to glorify the past, not to make it palatable, but to excavate the parts that were deliberately buried. If this story has affected you, if you understand now why certain chapters of history are told through battlefields and not through the women left behind in the ruins, then subscribe, share this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, because the best way to honor the daughters of Babylon isn't through monuments or memorials. It's through memory, through refusing to let their silence be the final word. I want to end with something discovered very recently. In 2019, archaeologists excavating a residential district in Babylon found a sealed jar. Inside were 16 clay tablets, personal correspondence dating to the late 6th century BCE. One of them is a letter from a woman named Nanaya Usri to her sister. It's one of the most complete personal letters we have from this period. She writes, "Sister, 10 years have passed since we last saw each other. You asked in your last message if I am well. I am alive. My husband treats me fairly. My children are healthy. By every measure, I should say I am well, but I am not. Because every night I dream I am standing at the Ishtar gate, waiting for you to come through it, waiting for Mother, waiting for the city to be as it was. And then I wake up and remember that the gate is still there, but everything else is gone. You are in Susa. Mother is dead. The city speaks 2 languages now and prays to foreign gods. And I am here, alive, well-fed, respected even, and I have never been more lost. Tell me, sister, does this feeling ever end? Or do we carry it until we die? The letter ends there. We don't have her sister's response. But that question, does this feeling ever end, echoes across 2,500 years. And the answer, I think, is no. It doesn't end. Not for the women who lived it. Not for their daughters. Not for the generations who grew up caught between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. The feeling of being erased while still alive, that doesn't end. But it can be witnessed. It can be remembered. It can be spoken out loud so that the silence doesn't win. Nanaya Usri, daughter of Babylon, writing to her sister 10 years after Conquest, lost even in survival. This video is for you. For Beletshari and Kashaya and Artainte and Ina Esagila Ramat. For the 11 women buried near Sipar. For the ones who chose silence rather than submission. For the thousands whose names were never recorded. You existed. You suffered. You mattered. And as long as we keep reading the tablets, translating the letters, excavating the graves, and telling your stories, you are not forgotten. That's the promise of history. Not that it changes what happened, but that it refuses to let what happened disappear. Thank you for watching Israk Historians. Subscribe, share, and keep the past alive. Because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced 2,500 years ago, especially then.